welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be implementing the coordinator pattern in our app, and we're going to be learning about, frankly, why you should care about it. So that said, make sure you destroy the like button, hit subscribe if you're new, and let's talk about what this pattern is, and then we'll get right into the code. So cool, the coordinator pattern. So a lot of you are probably familiar, hopefully, with MVC, Model View Controller, and there's a big issue with Massive View Controller where controllers get really large. So a thing that contributes to that issue is in this diagram here, if you had VCA, let's say it was just some screen, and you wanted the user to be able to hit a button to go to the second screen, your user would have to, hit the button here, and VCA would push VCB onto the screen. That requires this first controller to have intimate knowledge about the second one. It needs to instantiate it, it needs to configure it, and then it needs to push it. In other words, this controller is now responsible for navigating in your app. The coordinator pattern is essentially a pattern where the controllers have no knowledge of each other. They just notify the coordinator if some event occurred, and the coordinator coordinates, hence the name, the navigation between different screens and controllers in your app. So it really decouples the different controllers. So VCA here would just tell the coordinator, hey, a button was tapped, go ahead and do what you got to do with it. And the coordinator will make the decision to show this screen. So with that kind of basic understanding, let's implement it, and we'll come back to theory at the end because we learn by doing on this channel. So let's go ahead and open up Xcode, and we're going to create a new project here. We're going to stick with the app template under iOS, and I am going to call this coordinator pattern. Make sure your language is Swift. This is storyboard and this is UI kit. We're actually going to delete the storyboard in a moment, so no need to worry there. Go ahead and create it, and we're going to toss it onto our desktop. Let me expand my Xcode window, and let me also give this a run in our simulator. Let's make sure we've got the right one. We've got a 12 Pro Max selected here, and there is our empty app. So the first thing we want to do before we even start doing the coordinator stuff is we want to get rid of this storyboard nonsense here that Xcode gave us. And the reason is that the coordinator should be responsible for even, starting up our app, right? This first screen that's shown, we shouldn't launch into that from the storyboard. We should get there from the coordinator. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to first stop the app. We are going to delete the storyboard. So right click, delete, move to trash. We're going to go to our info plist, and we are going to delete two things in here. The first thing we want to delete is the entry for the main storyboard right here. And the second thing you want to delete is if you open up this application scene manifest and go all the way down, there's an entry for main in here. Go ahead and delete that as well. Don't run your app just yet because it's not going to work because we need to still set up our app delegate and scene delegate. But before we do that, let's start putting together our coordinator. So I'm going to right click and create a new file here, and we're going to want to create a Swift file. And let me just go ahead and call it coordinator. So what is a coordinator? Well, we talked about the fact that it needs to be able to start up our app, and then it also needs to be able to receive events from a coordinator view controller and perform some action. So I'm going to structure all of this as protocols, and we also want to import UI kit actually first up here. And the protocol is going to be coordinator, and the coordinator is going to have essentially two things on here. The first thing that it wants to have is a navigation controller. So this will end up being the root controller for our app. It's going to be optional with a get set, just like that. And then our coordinator will also need to have a way to, start. So we're going to add a function called start. This is what we should call once the app launches so the coordinator can, start up. And we also want a third thing, and that's a way for other controllers to tell the coordinator, hey, something happened, handle it. And that's going to be func event occurred. And I'm going to say here with type of event. Now, what is event? So I'm just going to create event as a really simple enum up here. And we're going to put one case in here of button tapped. Now, of course, you can extend this to your heart's content to get your app's functionality, but we're going to stick with this simple example. So cool, there's the coordinator that we're going to conform to in a moment. Now, every view controller also needs a reference to the coordinator to relay events. So we're going to create another protocol here, and this is going to be called coordinating. And it's simply going to have a coordinator on it. And let's see, we're going to go ahead and say this is of type coordinator, get set, just like that. And that should be sufficient in terms of the protocols we need. We just now need to create an actual coordinator. So I'm going to create a new file here to keep our code nice and organized. We're going to stick with the Swift file, and I'm going to call this main coordinator. Go ahead and create it. First thing we got to do in here is import UI kit. And the next thing we want to go ahead and do here is create a class called main coordinator. We are going to conform to the coordinator protocol we just made. We're also going to be lazy and hit the error and hit fix, and that'll automatically stub everything out for us. Go ahead and remove those empty code blocks. And we can leave this as is for now, but let's go set up our app delegate and scene delegate so we can boot into the coordinator. So cool, so we need to set up the window manually since we got rid of the storyboard. So the first thing we want to do is set up a optional UI window, and an application did finish launching. We're going to need to configure the window. So I'm going to say window is a UI window. We're going to create it with a frame of the screen main bounds. At the end here, we're going to want to say self.window equals window. We're going to want to make the window key and visible. And in between here, we want to actually set the root view controller of the window. But what is this going to be? Well, it's actually going to be a nav controller. We're going to say nav VC. And nav VC is simply going to be a very simple vanilla UI navigation controller. And it's not going to have a root controller. So if you open up these parentheses, you see there's an option for a root view controller down here. We're not going to provide that here because our coordinator should be doing that. So where's our coordinator in all this? Well, it's not here. So we need to add it. So we're going to say let coordinator is our main coordinator. Sometimes if autocomplete gives you a hard time, go ahead and hit Command B. Xcode should get its life together, and then we should be able to create it, main coordinator, just like that. Now on the main coordinator, we are going to say, let me put this down here, we're going to say coordinator.navigation controller is now this nav VC. And once we've set all of this up at the very bottom here, we are going to say coordinator.start. Now, we're not done just yet. We need to still implement this start function, but first we're going to copy all the stuff in here. And we also want to drop it into the scene delegate. This is similar to the app delegate. If you're not familiar, this handles multi-window support, but you do need to put it in here. We're going to rename this to be the window scene. And this isn't really specific to the coordinator pattern, but if you need to boot into something without a storyboard, you'll need to go ahead and do this. We're just going to change the initializer for the window to be the window scene. Hit Command B. Should be still compiling. Let's actually give this a run. We still need to implement that start function, but you'll see either the app crashes or we get an empty app. So we get an empty app, but we do have a navigation bar up here. So what's going on is the root view controller is being assigned to this navigation controller, but we need to give the navigation controller an initial screen. So what I'm going to do is we have this view controller here that Xcode gave us as a template. In here, we're going to say view.background color is going to be red, and we're going to say the title is home, just like that. And we're also going to conform to that protocol we created called coordinating. And if you recall, it has one property of coordinator on it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit fix with the error, and you'll see that it'll drop it in just like that. So now what we can do in our main coordinator class here is whenever start is called, which should only be once at the time of app launch, what we can go ahead and do is we can say let view controller is our view controller class. We're going to say view controller dot coordinator. We're going to need to cast it, but in just a moment we'll do that. So here we're going to say we have a navigation controller in here. We're going to set view controllers on it. It's going to be VC animated false, since this is our first controller once the app launches. And really important, what you want to do in here, you're going to say if let VC So let's say we'll call this if let coordinating VC is VC as coordinating. What we're going to do in here is we are going to say coordinating VC dot coordinator equals self. And let's see what the problem here is. Looks like we have an error. All right, if let this VC as, let's see, cast from view controller to that always fails. So what we're going to actually go ahead and do is we are going to say that this view controller is a UI view controller, and you can put an and sign right there for double types. We're going to say it is also coordinating. Perhaps that's a little cleaner. We'll see if Xcode likes that. If not, we can always cast it as well. It should be fine. And now what we can do here is we can say VC.coordinator. It should be able to pick it up, and we can assign that to self. Let's see what the problem here is. It's going to say it's immutable property. Yep. We're going to make this a var. That error should go away. And let's give this a command R to build and run. And we should see our red screen now with a title of home up here. So cool, we see that. So what's going on is the app launches, it instantiates one coordinator, and it calls start. In start, we create our view controller, which is coordinating and a UI view controller. We assign the coordinator to self, and then on the primary navigation controller of the coordinator, we set this VC. So we took a look at how to boot into this, but let's take a look at how do you relay events to the coordinator with this function here, and how do you have the coordinator handle functionality, because that is kind of the point of this pattern. So to do that, we're going to create another screen, another controller, and we're going to have a button on this red screen that we tap to go there. So I'm going to right click this, new file. We are going to create a Cocoa Touch subclass. It'll be a subclass of a UI view controller. I'm going to go ahead and call it second view controller. Go ahead and create it. And this will be very, very simple. I'm just going to set a title and a background color on here. So title is going to be second. Background color on the view is going to be a system blue, just like that. Now this also needs to be able to be coordinating, perhaps, if we wanted to take further action. So go ahead and conform to that protocol and hit fix. That'll bring in this coordinator property right there. The next thing we want to do is add a button to our red screen. So we're going to go here, and I'm just going to do it all in view to load because we're going to be lazy about it for the sake of time. But I'm going to say UI button, and we're going to give this a frame, CG rect, 0, 0, let's say 220 and 55. We're going to go ahead and add this as a subview. I'm also going to center it just like that. And let's style this up a little bit so it looks a little nicer. We're going to give it a background color of system green. I'm also going to give it a title color of white for normal. And let's see, of course, we want to add an action to the button so something happens once we tap it. And that something will be relaying to our coordinator that we need to do something. The event is going to be touch up inside. And finally, we need to go ahead and create this function in here. Hit Command B. I did that fairly quickly, make sure I don't have any typos. We're just creating a very simple button here. But most importantly, instead of doing this now, so traditionally we would say like the VC is the second view controller, and then we would push the view controller. We do none of that now. Now this view controller should have no knowledge of where the screen will go next for the user. All we're going to say is coordinator, and we are going to tell the coordinator that an event occurred. And in this case, we just called it button tapped. Perhaps we should have called it first screen button tap to be a little cleaner. And now back in the coordinator, let's go back in here. It's going to come into this function now. And in here, what we want to do is we are going to switch on the type here, just the type. And we're going to have a single case of button tapped, and we need to handle it. And the way we can handle it in here is we are going to say let's VC is the second view controller, navigation controller, push view controller of the VC, animated true, And keep in mind what we did below. We want to say this is a UI view controller as well as coordinating protocol, coordinating. Make sure you use this one and not the coordinator. And now that you've casted it to that, you can say VC, the coordinator is self. And make sure you make this immutable var so you can actually assign the coordinator. So go ahead and hit Command R to build and run. We should be able to tap on our button now and go to the next screen. Looks like we set a title color, but I never actually set the title. So let's come back here to our view controller. And let me just set a title on this button. We're going to say set title. Let's see. Tap me. And this will be normal. Go ahead and give it a tap. And let's see, I've got a weird, we did title color. That's not what we want. We want to just set a title. Let's try that one more time. We're going to say set title. We want this one. We're going to say tap me. And the state will be normal. Hit Command R to give it a run once more. We've got our cool looking button here. We can tap it and we get to this screen. So the beauty of this is really that this controller just levies its events to the coordinator. And the reason that's powerful is if you ever wanted to, refactor the flow of your app, or let's say you have multiple code paths that can be executed, if it's a user in the EU, or if you have a user in Asia, you might want to show different things. The coordinator can do all that business logic now. And each controller is no longer responsible for app-wide navigations. So the last thing I'll mention here before we jump back to that diagram for a moment is you can also imagine that a coordinator could get large. And the goal of this is to make it simple, right? The goal is not to take all the stuff in a controller and shove it into another object, because that kind of defeats the purpose of a massive view controller, right? We would just have a massive coordinator. So what you could also do, and this is fairly commonly done, a coordinator might also manage other coordinators. So you could also have something on here like children, which is a array of coordinator objects themselves. And you could make it optional. In our case, it will be optional. And the way this actually works is, let's say you have a part of your app which is, handling settings, right? You might have a settings coordinator. Let's say there's a part of your app that's like food delivery. You might have a food delivery flow coordinator. And the idea is to really simplify the objects and rather, decouple and make them smaller. So in our case, we would just have this, assigned to nil, and this error should go away now that we are conforming to it. But let's say we would get this event, right? We could say, we can check in here, which coordinator was the event for, what type of the event came in, and then we can send that on over to be handled by a particular coordinator. So the point I want to really drill home is, you want to keep your objects small, you want to keep them isolated, and they should really only have a single responsibility. So this pattern is fairly popular in larger apps. I know firsthand that Facebook uses this in the Messenger app that they just recently rebuilt. But that all said, that's kind of all I've got for the code stuff for you guys. Let me move this over and jump back in to that diagram. So you'll also notice there are arrows not only going from the VC to the coordinator, but also the coordinator to the VC. So another thing that you might want to do is, let's say you have an API caller in your app that performs some type of network logic, right? You might want to go and hit an API and get some data. Instead of the controller, telling the object, hey, go perform a network call, your coordinator can actually do that as well. So you would have another object that would be something like API caller, but instead of the controller holding on to it, this guy would. So the VC would say, hey, the user tapped a button to log into their account, for example. The coordinator would say, okay, I've got some data for it now. Let me go ahead and try to log in. And let's say an error occurred. The user entered the wrong password. The coordinator can also pass an event back to the controller, and the controller would show an error to the user, saying something along the lines of incorrect username and password. So don't assume that the coordinator is just navigation oriented. You can really use it to craft a much more organized application. And it really serves as kind of the glue for a lot of the things in your app. So navigation, networking, and ultimately business logic. So whether that's getting data and driving the UI, or that's navigation from screen to screen, or that's in-app purchases, that's all stuff that needs to be coordinated and will be hence named by and handled by the coordinator. So that's all I've got for you guys in this video. If you found it useful, definitely destroy that like button down below. Leave a comment if you've used this pattern before. I find myself not using it too much in personal projects, but whenever a personal project gets very large or I work professionally, I use it a lot because the code scales much more nicely and more organized. And yeah, subscribe if you haven't done that either. We're growing the channel together. Check out iOS Academy, linked in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you guys in the next video.